Today was quite an informative podcast with Coach Paddy Quinn from Northern Ireland. He spoke about his journey coaching youth players, coaching at senior level. But what was even more special was what was unique was that we discussed mental health. Mental health is so important because without an able mind, without a healthy mind, the body, the physical aspect isn't of too much use. So we really went into a bit of detail about how, as coaches, we should pay a bit more attention and a few ways of how to strategize our own coaching methodology to accommodate mental health. So go ahead, it's a real informative podcast. I hope you all enjoy it. So, on today's podcast, again, very, very excited to have Paddy Quinn from Northern Ireland. And it's going to be a hell of a podcast because we are going to be talking about a lot of things football, coaching, and why don't we just hear from the man himself? Paddy, you're an A licensed coach coaching at Dungannon Swifts, if I've pronounced it right, in Northern Ireland. So, how are you doing? And we always start with wanting to know about the person from the person himself.
Hi Ryan, thanks for inviting me. My name is Paddy Quinn. I've been coaching for 11 years now. I've gone through the UEFA coaching badges structure from the bottom level one right through to A license. And I've been working primarily in youth football and youth development, but also in adult football as well in Northern Ireland. I've worked in amateur and more professional environments, and I've also done a bit on the in an advisory capacity and some structural roles at clubs as well. And yeah, so I've tried to cover quite a breadth of the game during the 11 years I've been there, or I've been involved in the coaching side. So it's been good.
Definitely. And having looked at your CV, it was so good to see that you have worked at youth level as well as adult level. But what was mesmerizing was that you have a multi-million pound family business. Now that's really unique. Can you tell me more about it?
uh, yeah, so we have a business that is in manufacturing. We convert passenger cars to funeral vehicles. It's something that my dad started and has been on. It's been going nearly 30 years now, and it's a good business. And to be fair, there's quite a lot of transferable skills between managing a business and working in football, and I think one helps drive the other for me. Uh, it's Whenever I deliver training in the business to any of our staff members, it means that I've got a good, strong background there in coaching and delivering training. And on the other side, particularly with looking at the structural elements in football clubs and how football clubs are becoming more and more professional and business like, it's good to have those skills that can transfer across too.
Really unique, interesting, unique, and I'm sure you balance it very well because you are a passionate football coach, football person as well. So,
We try our best.
yeah, I'm sure you do a good job. In India, we are aware of the English game, English Premier League, and all that stuff. So, can you tell me how football is structured in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, the game in Northern Ireland has changed dramatically in the past 10 years, really. It's a real dynamic time for football in Northern Ireland. The first thing about the country is that football is it's not like other places like England where it's very much the number one sport. Over here, we've got Gaelic games, which is traditional Irish football, as well as soccer and rugby is quite popular too. So there's a lot of competition there for participation and also spectators. Um, if 10 years ago, football would have been considered very amateur and almost at most semi-professional, but now it's in the top league. Every player, I think, is on a professional contract in the top league now. The vast majority of staff members are on professional contracts. We have more and more full-time players, clubs, and academies coming through, and more players going across to England to sign for professional clubs there at higher levels than before. And that's been reflected in there's been outside investment into football clubs in the country. Larne and Glentoran in particular have had quite heavy investment into things like their playing staff and in the terms of Larne, their facilities. So the top leagues in Northern Ireland are getting better and better. They're becoming really, really competitive. Um, and there's a second, so the top two tiers, what we call Premiership Championship here, are doing really, really well. The next tier is what we call intermediate levels. So that's the third and fourth tiers. And there's some semi-professional clubs. So you have clubs that have some players in professional contracts and not others. There's some clubs that are all amateur, but they maybe pay expenses to players and things like this.
Yeah.
And then the below that, there's what we call the junior clubs, and that's everything from a grassroots club right up to a really strong club that just doesn't have the money to be able to attract players and things like that. But the participation rates in football in Northern Ireland is really, really high. Not far from me, there's a village called Ahackle, and I think there's 1,000 people roughly live there, and there's two football clubs that are fierce rivals. And if so, it's for such a small place. There's lots and lots of football teams and football clubs, and they're really competitive and with each other. But it's growing and growing and getting better and better every year. The attendances have gone up by like 50% in the past 10 years as well in the top league, and we have a TV deal now with Sky Sports in the UK. So there's some Friday nights you'll see Northern Irish football on live and Sky Sports One, and it's been really, really popular in England as well. So it seems to be on the up and up with everything moving towards a more professional and a more elite environment.
I just hope marketability wise it does reach the heights of the English or the Scottish League very soon, because I'm sure there's no dearth of quality for sure. And now you as a coach, you have your expertise lies in youth football, but you have also been a mainstream head coach manager. So how did that role come about, and what was the experience like?
Um, yeah, I was at that time I was working in youth football for a few years, and there was the club I was at the time were making a lot of structural changes and moving coaching staff around, and I was a part of that, but I felt it was a little stagnant in my position. And around the same time, I got an offer from a club in the intermediate level in Northern Ireland. Um, and when we met and we spoke about the project and what they wanted to do, they were a little concerned about their intermediate status, that they might drop down into junior, which they really didn't want to do. They wanted to find ways to solidify the group on the pitch and to invest in the facilities and the infrastructure and to try and stop the downward spiral and steady and then build towards something more in the future. And we thought it was a difficult project, but we thought we could provide something there. And when we went in, I loved it. It was, I think we did some really good work, and our in terms of playing staff, we ended up um, from where they were to where we got them to, where we brought in some really exciting young players from the local area, and we developed a game model that was around playing, attacking, exciting football. And it's unfortunately the COVID pandemic disrupted a lot of the work that we did and a lot of the good work that we did, but we were still able to put a lot of good things in place. And the reason I left that role was due to the family business after COVID. I had to devote more time to that, and I just couldn't find enough time to be able to manage a football club as well. And but we were able to hand it over in really good shape. And since then, they've gone from strength to strength and really have continued to build and grow. And I'm really delighted for them. And I still go and watch some of their games now and again. And I'm always welcome, and it always made feel very welcome. And it was a really good experience for me. But then I moved back into youth football. Afterwards, I took a few months out of the game, and then I got probably know yourself, but having a well qualified coach in the area is something that football clubs are always looking for. So when I'm there and I'm available, that there's clubs do want you in, and it puts you in a good position because you can pick your project that you want to be involved in, and you can do something that you feel you're doing something worthwhile. And I think that's what I was able to do both in men's football and since in youth football too.
I'm sure working with adults, coaching adults must have been another experience altogether, learning experience. But talking about young players, now you have had 9 players who have either gone on to the first team or actually signed for Premier League or Championship clubs. Now that's massive. That's really huge. So can you tell me more about those, about your journey with those players, as well as do you have a specific style to develop, to coach young players and develop them?
Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I see the role of a youth coach particularly as being a small part of those players' journeys. You know, um, maybe in fact, I actually had this conversation today with the some of the players that I'm working with at the minute, and I said that at the end of the day, next year or the year after, you'll be working with a different coach, and again, you'll be working with a different coach again as you move through your development. The thing that everything has in common is you as a player. So it's really important that players take responsibility for their own development, and that you're not relying on others to do things for you. As a coach, you're a guide. You can only steer players, give them the best information you can, and steer them in the right direction, and give them the opportunities to grow. And we've the guys that have done very very well, they all had that in common, that they had they had a mentality that they took responsibility for themselves and their development, and that they realized that your role as a coach there is to help them, and that everything you were telling them to do or asking them to do was to help them grow, and to help them get better, and to help them develop. And they were the people that took those things on board, particularly off the pitch. Things like nutrition and sleep and conditioning and preparation for games and recovery after games. There's sometimes young players feel that if you tell them to recover after a game, that they want, oh well, I want to go and play another game with my mates, and this kind of thing. Or you tell them to sleep and they say, oh, I'll spend another hour on the PlayStation before a game, and whereas the guys that make it are the guys that don't do that. The
Yeah.
guys that get there are the ones that do all of the things, all the little extra bits that they know will make a difference, and they get there. And fingers crossed, there's we see many more over the next few years that make it and play international football, and get good professional contracts. It's great to see. It's great to see them doing really well.
And how do you build a rapport with those young players to get the best out of them?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my background in youth football is the majority of it has been between the ages of sort of 15 and 18,
Yeah.
which many people see as being a very difficult age to work with,
Yes.
because in terms of their social circles are changing, and they're that in between stage between being sort of children and moving into becoming young adults. And it's the rebellious time, and it's the time when the relationship with their parents are changing, the relationship with their teachers and with authority figures changes, and everything as well. But the big thing I think about building rapport is that you're authentic as a coach. um Sometimes some coaches feel that they have to do things or say certain things because that's what you have to do, rather than because they really believe it. You have to have some kind of personality there. I use humor quite a bit with the lads, and I always have done. I probably, between, there's a bit of a line there that becomes a bit of a gray area as to whether a joke is the right thing or the wrong thing to say at the right or the wrong times. But it's important that I'm authentic, and I am who I am with them, that they don't think, oh well, he's putting on an act for us, or that he's doing something. He's just saying that because he's a coach, or he's just saying that because he wants to get a reaction. It's that, like if I'm upset with how they perform, I tell them I'm upset about this. This is what I feel. I'm emotional about this performance. And if they do really well, I'll tell them, this is fantastic. I feel so happy for you guys at doing this. And I think that authenticity for a lot of players means something to them. Having someone that is there that genuinely cares and genuinely is very honest and open and transparent about everything. I think that's what they're looking for. And
Yeah.
something as well, particularly with male athletes at that age, is that fairness means a lot to them, that everyone is treated in a fair way. And I think that's really important, that if you set rules or set boundaries, that everyone abides by them, and that it doesn't matter how good a player is or how important you feel he is to the group. If he goes past the line or past the boundary or breaks rules, that they should be treated in the same way as any other player would. I think that's really, really important to make sure that everybody's treated in a fair manner and that everyone knows why they're being treated that way. So the authenticity and transparency are two bedrocks that I think you have to live by.
And I think clear and open communication must be going a long way in your approach. You have also seen the development of a lot of young players. Now, what is it like for the players to transition from an amateur to a professional environment?
Oh, good question. A lot of players find it really difficult, um, because when they're younger, I think at amateur clubs, there's sort of two ways that things are done. Is that you either have your best players that play every week no matter what happens, or everyone gets equal game time. And to move from that to an environment where it's a meritocracy and there's competition and everyone must fight for their place, and can be a difficult transition for some players for a start. And then the added commitment that there is to training more often, and to be expected that you make lifestyle changes in order to facilitate your football too. That you can't just go on a Friday night if you fancy a pizza to go and have a pizza with your mates, or to go and have a McDonald's with your mates. That if you've got a game on a Saturday, you have to prepare for that game on a Saturday, every week, not just when you feel like it. And some players struggle with struggles, maybe even the wrong word, but some players don't realize the importance of how their lifestyle affects their game, and that if they want to push on to get a professional contract or to play professional football, that they have to make it a lifestyle,
Yeah.
that they have to make football, that everything is geared towards their game. That's not to say that they can't have anything outside of football. Obviously, they can have hobbies and interests. They can meet their friends and everything, but everything has to fit together. There has to be a balance together to ensure that their performance levels are there. And that's a big thing to ask young people to do, particularly those coming from an amateur environment. It's a big thing to ask them to do. Um, and some do it and love it. Some people love that lifestyle. That's what they're all about. They think it's fantastic, and it's great. Other players don't like it but do it anyway. And some players try it and they can't do it consistently, and then other players get a taste of it and think this isn't for me, which is fine. That's not everyone what it can be. Not everyone can have the commitment to be a professional footballer. Like you see what those guys do, and the effort and the commitment levels that they have and the sacrifices that they make, and I don't know that I could do it.
Yeah.
So it's a real credit to them, and people talk about how much they get paid, and if you had to do what they have to do at times,
Right.
you'd be wanting money well paid for it. But yeah, I think the lifestyle changes and the commitments that is needed. I think that's the big difference and the big shock for players moving through.
Right. And what about the reality is that not many make it. So then how do you convey to your players the importance of a good education along with football?
Absolutely, because the percentage of players come through the system successfully are it is low. Like, we can't beat about the bush. There's a very low number of players that participate in football actually get to an elite level. And education is incredibly important, and more now, especially with the higher level football clubs. The clubs realize that, and they're bringing education into their training cycle. That you have an opportunity to learn and gain qualifications in an area related to sport,
Yeah.
but and while training with your club or in conjunction with training and playing for your club. And I think that's really important, because there's so many good pathways that can get opened up through sport,
Right.
like coaching, like ourselves, but also you can go into routes into sports science and physiotherapy, going into analysis and data science,
Yeah.
and that you can travel, and there's so many different things you can do. Being a football player isn't the be all and end all, and as long as everyone reaches the potential that they have, that's the main thing. Um, but anything could happen. A player can. We all see stories now and again of players who get a really serious injury at 19, and they suddenly they can't play at the level that they thought they were going to be able to play at, and they have to think about new careers. And it's so important to have qualifications and an education to fall back on, that
Yeah.
if something happens totally outside of your control, that you can still build a really good life and still achieve lots of things that you would like to achieve, just through a different pathway and a different journey. And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Right, and it's important for any player, however good they are, isn't it? Because once they retire, in case they don't get a coaching role or a television role, then what do they do? So yes, it is definitely a very important factor. Now, I would also want to know you, like, so now we are going to talk a bit about you as your methods as a coach. So when you design a periodization schedule for various age groups, what factors do you consider, and how do you design it in a way that they are ready for the higher level as they progress in each age group?
That's a big question. But yeah, the first thing that I think you do when you're designing even a training session, on a single night, is that you must have the end goal in mind. How does this relate to a game? And then in youth development, it's how does this relate to the first team of the club that we're playing at? How where is this player at in their journey? And how can the end goal of being in the first team, how can we get them from A to Z, and what steps do we need to take in between? And that has to be the basis for anything you're designing, be it a periodization schedule or even a single training session. It's always with the end in sight. For the likes of, for example, an under 16 or an under 18 team, they're further in their development. They're at a stage where you would hope that they are starting to work on what we would call the senior development phase. And that's when they should have an understanding of their roles and responsibilities. They should have an understanding of the tactical concepts of the team, and you're starting to prepare them uh, for playing first team football, for playing senior level football. And it's so the things that are coming into it are like the likes of off field preparation and recovery. The conditioning side of things are starting to ramp up. So you look to incorporate that into your training schedule. You look to make sure that their week's training is preparing them well for a match day, physically as well as mentally and tactically. And as you get younger, the conditioning side of it becomes slightly less important, because they have to learn about the game. They have to learn about the different events of the game, like with the ball, against the ball, attacking and defensive transitions. They have to learn about restarts and set pieces.
Right.
They have to learn about all the elements, all the blocks that make up football. They have to learn each one of them and how they link together. They have to learn their roles and responsibilities, and that has to be incorporated into any kind of tactical periodization that you do. If you have a massive cycle of 4 weeks, for example, you must make sure that you are covering tactical and technical elements that you want the players to develop at that stage of their progress, and that must relate to what the first team does and what the end goal is as well.
Right.
Um, so for me, with the age groups at sort of under 13, 14, and 15, they have to be thinking about preparing them for this, all about preparing for the next step, the next step, the next step. And it's really important that each club has a model in place of a playing philosophy in place that that each age group knows what they're working towards and what's expected of them at which age, that there's a benchmark there for all the players, that they know, well, I should know this, I should be able to do this by now. And if we can't do that, then that's what I have to work on. That's where my gaps are. That's where my current weaknesses are that I need to work on and iron out and get better, so that I am able to take the next step to move up and get closer and closer to the end goal, which is first team football.
And in the bigger picture, when you design a playing philosophy for the club, is it based on your own beliefs of how football should be played, or any other factors like perhaps the history of the club?
Also, it's really important. I think clubs have an identity themselves, and it's really important that the club and the people of the club tap into that identity, and that's where the playing philosophy comes from. Um, if someone from the outside comes in to try and implement a playing philosophy that's their personal beliefs that doesn't align with those who are trying to implement it, then that's where you can run into issues. That's when you can run into people moving in different directions and trying to do different things and not being on the same page, and that's when you can get fractured and splintered groups in a club. And it's one of the big reasons that I came to Dungannon Swifts, was because the style of football that they have and the way they like to play and the identity of that club very much aligns with how I like the game to be played and how I like to see uh, players play, and how I like to see young players develop, especially. A lot of the core beliefs at that club align with my own. I've been at other clubs where that hasn't been the case, and it makes things more difficult, because if everyone's doing different things, the players are getting mixed messages from one year to the next, and it doesn't make for a nice pathway to first team football. It holds the players back, in my opinion, because they're being given mixed signals.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, when you design a playing philosophy, it's important for everyone that's involved in the implementation to have an input into it, and to make sure that everyone is agreed on what the club's identity is and how the club wants to play, and what that when everyone thinks about what they want to see happen on the pitch, that it's the same across the board, and that everyone's given the same messages to the players and the same information throughout each age group.
Very, very important, really important. And you introduced a full-time academy program at your club. So, what does the full-time academy program look like?
Yeah, so this hasn't launched yet. It's launching in the summer, and it's the it's again, as a coach, and in any role that you're in, you're a part of a team. I'm very loath to take any credit for anything that like with player development or anything else. So we as a club have implemented, or are in the process of implementing, a full-time academy from next year. It means that we do it in conjunction with the Stephen Gerrard Academy, which are going to look after the educational side of things, and the coaching is happening from the coaches at the club are providing full-time training schedule for all players that are post 16.
Yeah.
Um, it means that, as we spoke about earlier, that there's education aligned with the players' football, and there's some really good career opportunities through it if you don't make it as a footballer. And at the same time, it gives all the players an opportunity to be able to develop with more contact time, more training time with their coaches, and develop that lifestyle that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
that to give them the best chance possible to play at the highest level that they can.
Right. And what is your method, your own method of setting up or restructuring youth academies? Because I think you have done that in the past.
Yeah, some of the work I've done around that has been very different depending on the club.
Yeah.
Because when you, in terms of, because one club has completely different needs from another club,
Yeah.
and again, it's important to get everyone in the room agreed on what's the best model to move forward on, and that there's a structure in place that involves clear roles and responsibilities for everybody involved. And because ultimately it's about trying to give the players a coherent step-by-step pathway that they can see that from where they are to get into the first team. And it's about putting people at the club in places that can maximize their skill sets, and if needed, bring new people in with the skills that the club maybe lacks, in order to make it happen. There are some clubs that are maybe starting a new youth academy, and if they're starting from the ground up, you have to think about that in a different way, because you have to start with the very young players in the foundation level, and it's who can you bring in to deliver coaching and deliver session plans for that, and deliver a curriculum and a schedule. You have to think about facilities. You have to think about kit and equipment and all of those kinds of things. So that's a totally different animal to the likes of a club that has a well-established youth academy that just needs to have it structured in a way that makes use of the existing players and the existing facilities and the existing systems to try and make the most of it. Um, a lot of the time when there's an existing academy, you're thinking about, right, in the next 3 years, what can we do? How can we help get the players that are 15 years of age now, by the time they're 18, how can we make sure that more of them are getting into the first team, or getting an opportunity to play first team football? Whereas with something that's maybe starting from the ground up, you're starting to think, well, where's this going to be in 10 years' time? And it's a much longer term project, because then you have to think about, well, what will football look like in 10 years? What do I need from these football players in 10 years' time? As I said before, football in Northern Ireland is moving so quickly. It's moving forward so quickly. And you have to think about, where does this club want to be in 10 years, and how can what we're doing now help feed what the club is going to be in 10 years' time, rather than what the club is now. And so it's much more difficult to do that, to in a successful way.
I assume that bringing players in is a big part of this. So what is your scouting and recruitment strategy like?
Yeah, scouting and recruitment is something that's getting more and more important, as we're seeing the changes in the last few years in Northern Ireland. There's a lot of competition for players, and players are beginning to move around more than they have in the past at a younger age. There's players at 16 who have had 3 and 4 clubs, by that age, which is, it's something that wouldn't have happened even 5 or 6 years ago. Um, so it means that you have to try and think outside the box. It's very difficult for young players to get any kind of data on them, or any kind of video of them. So it's very much in-person scouting, and especially with the resources that the clubs have in Northern Ireland, it's difficult to get um it's difficult to get people on the ground at as many matches as you'd want them to be there. So you do have to try and think outside the box a lot more. You have to try and have like a database of players at different age groups and what clubs they're at, and track how many appearances they have, and where they're going, where they're moving from and to, and try and keep abreast of all the players that are in both your local area, and in Northern Ireland's quite a small
Yeah.
country in terms of area. So um, you can look around the whole country and look at what players are playing at higher levels. but also you need to keep an eye on players that are playing at a lower regional
Yeah.
level as well, because um, there could be hidden gems there. There could be players that, because it's so difficult to have boots on the ground at all these games, players slip through the net, and they can play for years in a lower level and no one sees them. So it's really important to try and get value from what you do and find these players if they exist, instead of being joining the rat race for the same handful of players that everyone wants to get. So that's something that we've definitely tried to do over the past year or so, has been look outside the box and think outside the box, and look at players that maybe are being overlooked by other clubs.
Interesting. It's every club's dream to try and get the gem that's, more economical and all that stuff. Now, this is you as a coach. Now we are going to be going into a topic which I've never really discussed before, which is mental health. So you have held a role as a mental health advocate at every club you have been with. So can you tell me what your role is, and shed some light in general on mental health and football?
Yeah, absolutely. So as as a mental health as a mental health advocate at clubs, my role is basically to be a first contact for any player who is struggling with something related to their mental health, and that's obviously a wide range of things that it can be.
Yeah.
But it's to be a first contact, and then to have the skills to be able to work with that in the moment and in an appropriate way, and then if need be to be able to take appropriate action if it's needed, if they need to be signposted towards someone else, or if there needs to be further action taken on my behalf or someone else's behalf, or if someone else needs to be brought into the conversation, or sometimes it isn't that, it's just something that a player just needs to know that there's support there, and that it's and maybe some minor advice here and there about things in their personal life, that it becomes not necessarily something that's
Yeah.
a huge mental illness issue, but just something that it's like a situational issue. Um, but it's just good to have that the players know that there's somewhere to go with if there is an issue of some description.
But it's not everyone. I mean, everyone doesn't really open up about their mental health. So as a coach, how do you detect
No.
if there is potentially a mental health issue around with the player?
Yeah, something, it's really difficult to do that. Could be because everyone deals with things in different ways. The big advice that any coach really gets with regards to mental health, and anyone in general, is to look for changes in behavior.
Yeah.
Stark changes in behavior. If someone is acting one way consistently and then they suddenly change, their personality changes in some way, that can be an indication of something, not something wrong, and something that might need to be addressed. And I think it's important as well to make sure that if, for example, there's an issue with their sporting performance, or an issue around their sporting output, that you make sure that there's not something underlying there as well.
Yeah.
It's always something that I have in the back of my head, is that if you want to have a conversation with a player about their performance on the pitch, or about their performance in training, or even about behavioral things, behavior at training or whatever, it's really important to come into that conversation with an open mind, that
Yeah.
you don't know all of the facts, and to give that player the space to say if there is something wrong, that it's not done in an accusatory way,
Yeah.
but that it's coming from a way like, look, this is an issue for both of us, and how can we together help make things better? And you could find out that way that they could give some kind of cues, like, oh, I just haven't been feeling confident recently. Well, why have you not been feeling confident? Is everything okay? Is it you're not feeling confident just at football? Is it you're not feeling confident elsewhere as well? And try and It's not to say that like the vast majority of the time there aren't any mental health issues to be worried about when there's things, but it's just good to know that it's a possibility that it can be, and on that moment that there is one, um, you can be confident you've handled it in the best way possible and that you've helped the player get through it, because that's what it's about. Even, I mean, even if it is just that the guys having bad behavior and is disruptive. Well, at the end of the day, you want to try and help him get that better. You don't want to just be, accusatory about it and create confrontation about it. It's not about that. It's about trying to help the player get better and do what's needed to be to develop as a footballer.
Such a dynamic and complex field, and I believe that mental health is as important as physical health, because without your mind, your body isn't of much use. So how can one break the stigma so that there are more conversations about it and normalize the entire thing?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because for someone who is struggling with their mental health, a lot of the time that stigma is themselves, and it's an imagined stigma rather than something that other people are saying.
yeah,
Um, but I think being conscious of it is a big part of it, and particularly in a leadership role that coaches have. I think being conscious of the role that mental health and mental illness has in our society, particularly after COVID, because there's a lot of people, like we basically globally had a really traumatic event happen between either COVID itself or the result of lockdowns and things like that. Like it was an incredibly traumatic time for the entire world, and it's absolutely understandable that people's mental health isn't as good as it was pre-COVID, even if they don't realize it.
yeah,
But I think if I go back to how when we spoke about how you build rapport with players, um, it's very important to be open about things yourself. And like I'm really open to the players in terms of, I am really disappointed and I feel really disappointed in this. This has knocked me for six. Like it's if we lose a game, put in a really poor performance, I
yeah,
say, I'm gutted about this. This has ruined my weekend. This is horrible. This is dreadful. I feel crappy about this.
mhm,
And then I make it a point to say, because I feel crappy about this, I'm going to do this weekend to help me get through the weekend and get over it. And I'm going to review the video footage of the game, and I'm going to be really cross with the video footage. And then I'm going to analyze what we could do better. And then I'm going to prepare for the next training session. And
yeah,
then once I prepare for the next training session, that's how I'm going to put it right. And
yeah,
then I look forward. So by being honest, I'm trying to give the players some skills to be able to gain resilience and to build forward. That's okay in a sporting context. For things outside of sport, it becomes more difficult. But
yeah,
I'm always really, like, when at the beginning of every season, I make sure that all the players are aware that of my role as a mental health advocate,
yeah.
and that what that role entails, and that I'm there to help if need be, or I'm there as to talk to if need be as well. And but as you, with regards to the stigma, a lot of, especially with young players, a lot of the time the onus is on the adult to make that first contact. So I think it's important, even if you don't think there's an issue, to have one-to-ones with players, to
Yeah.
just say, how do you think things are going? How do you feel about your performances? How do you feel about the season so far? Everything okay at home? Just to check in with everyone to make sure everything's fine,
Right.
and to give them an opportunity to say, oh well, actually, I've been feeling a bit crap recently because this happened or that happened, and to take an interest there. And I think by having those conversations and by being leaders in sport, and by driving those kind of open and transparent and honest and authentic conversations, I think that's how we move past the stigma.
And to be a mental health advocate as a coach, is there any kind of formal certification or license you require?
Yeah, well, I have a background in sports psychology as well, and I'm also insured through a psychological therapist as well. So I have that backing too. And in order to do that, you need to have somewhere to signpost, and you need to get training from that person so that you can signpost to them when it's appropriate. You need to know when's the right the way to move that forward.
Right.
Um, but in terms of other coaches, all you need to do is to be open. And most clubs have a safeguarding officer anyway, which is a different role. It's one that if there's accusations or suspicions of abuse or neglect or things like that, it would go to a child safeguarding officer. This role is a bit different. It's much more informal, but it is insured and certified through an external as psychological therapist so that it can be escalated if need be.
Right. That's the beauty of these podcasts. There are so many things that we in India can nick because this is not something that's prevalent in Indian football. But I would now again here only if you want to answer it, you can. So, have you had any severe cases of mental health? Have you had to deal with them? For example, depression, for example, maybe suicidal thoughts?
The short answer is yes. I'm trying to find a way without breaking confidences as to how much detail.
Yeah.
Um, there have been a couple of occasions. Sometimes there are situational things. Um, like for example, I've had occasions where a young player has split up with his first girlfriend and has been devastated, and that's something that a couple of weeks puts.
Yeah.
It's a situational thing that you don't want to be crass and say they'll get over it, but it's first love, all of this, and hormonal and all of these things, and you give them support, but you know that there's going to be an end goal there, and whatever. There have been other occasions where things have been more serious, and a lot of that. There's been times when it has had to be escalated. Um, and it's but there's always a successful outcome so far, and the players have come through and done well, and indeed are still involved in football, still playing football, and doing really well. And there's um yeah, and but it is difficult when there's something like that, because then you always think about, well, did you miss something beforehand, and um could it something have been done to prevent it? And then you start to think, is it even though something like mental illness and depression is really serious, you think, is there something even more behind it, and whatnot. But at the same time, you still have to have boundaries for how much responsibility you have in a situation. That's why it's really important to have someone there to be able to signpost to escalate, because at the end of the day, your role there is as a mental health advocate and as a first contact. It's not there to sort out the problem. It's
Yeah.
there just to make sure that they have an avenue to get the help that's needed.
Yeah.
And as long as you do that on a personal level, that's what you're there for, what you can do. um but it's not nice seeing anyone in a difficult spot, or anyone who's struggling with their mental health, with depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
It's not nice having players that are coming from a difficult home life either.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can only do that small part to try and make things better for them.
100%. It's such a vast topic. I think we can talk about it for ages. And yeah, but it is deep. It's deep for sure. So that brings us to the end of it. But before I let you go, you've had so much experience, in coaching, in designing programs, in mental health. Personally, what are your eventual ambitions? What's your plan? Where do you want to reach eventually? Short term, long term goals?
Oh goodness. I mean, I'm I think sometime in the future I'd like to be involved in first team football again and adult football again.
Yeah.
I'm still but I would like to get involved in adult football again, at a decent level. Um, I at the short term, I want to help the players that I'm working with develop better. I want to help do what I can with the club with the setup of the Stephen Gerrard Academy next summer. Whatever I can do there to help that and to help make that a success. That's what I want to do, and we just want to help growing the club and developing the youth setup at the club as best we can over the next year to 2 years.
Yeah.
Um, Medium term, I would like I would like myself and my influence to grow, and I like to meet new people. I would like to continue to network. I've been able to meet so many great people through football. It's one of the beauties of working in Northern Ireland is you're quite close to the rest of the UK, and you can have some really good contacts through that. And um, yeah, I just want to keep growing and developing as a coach as well. I'm learning every day. You
Yeah.
know, I'm learning from the people around me. I'm learning from the players that I work with,
Yeah.
the coaches that I'm with, and I want to keep learning and developing and trying to get better and better, and hopefully put myself in a position where we can be really successful at the Swifts.
I hope that you achieve all your endeavors, and it was a fantastic chat. I genuinely enjoyed it because we have basically spoken about topics that aren't usually spoken about. A coaching podcast is more towards the training ground and technique, tactics, and all that stuff. But it was good. It was really good, understanding about you with your family business going, but also experiencing so much in football, the mental health part, and everything else. So, thank you for your time, and I appreciate that you've been kind enough to be on this podcast.
Oh, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure, Ryan. It's been fantastic. Thank you.